At her father-in-law's birthday celebration, my mother-in-law humiliated me in front of guests, and for the first time, I stood my ground. My husband flew into a rage and threw me out onto the stairwell, wearing only what I had on after taking my money and phone. I was sitting on a cold bench when a luxury car pulled up beside me, and a man quietly said, "Let's go, Elena. Today we're going to turn your life upside down and make them regret what they did to you." Welcome. You're watching the Life in History channel. Before we begin, please tell us where you're watching from. Thank you for being with us. We wish you an enjoyable listen to this true life story. Igor Mikhailovich's jubilee was celebrated with grandeur. His wife, Alla Vassilievna, had booked a banquet hall at the Golden Lion restaurant in the city center, arranged for live music, and invited over 40 guests. The tables were laden with appetizers. Waiters silently refilled glasses, and the birthday boy, flushed with attention and cognac, received congratulations with the dignity of a man accustomed to being the center of attention. Elena sat next to her husband, Denis, closer to the end of the long table. She adjusted her modest wool dress, bought 3 years ago during a sale, and idly traced the rim of her glass. She knew the evening would be difficult. She had sensed it when Alla Vassilievna greeted them at the entrance, her eyes raking Elena from head to toe with a critical gaze. It also unsettled her that her father-in-law, usually warm and calm, avoided looking in her direction. An hour before they left, Denis had said, "Mom asked me not to argue today. Just nod." For 3 hours she had done just that. "And you, Elena, still working at that same old place?" Alla Vassilievna inquired loudly. Her voice dripped with such condescension that the surrounding conversations began to fade. "Yes, Alla Vassilievna, as an accountant," Elena replied calmly. "And how much do you earn there?" 30 to 40,000. Denis tensed beside her but remained silent. Elena felt her neck flush. "That's enough for our needs," she said quietly. "For your needs?" Alla Vassilievna swept her gaze dramatically across the guests, seeking support. "And when are you and Denis moving into decent housing? Or do you plan to live your entire lives in a Khrushchevka?" I offered. "Come to our company, I'll arrange a good salary for you. But no, pride won't let you." Someone at a nearby table snickered. Elena clutched the napkin under the table. "I have a relevant education, Alla Vassilievna, work in my field." "Oh, please spare me the formalities." Her mother-in-law waved a dismissive hand, adjusting her impeccably styled hair. "What does it matter what you do, as long as you bring money into the house? Because looking at you, wearing that second-hand stuff, it's embarrassing to be seen with you in public. Denis is a distinguished man, and his wife is like a little gray mouse." A ripple of laughter went through the hall. Aunt Nina, Igor Mikhailovich's sister, covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes gleamed. Denis stared at his plate, pretending to be engrossed in the meat platter. Elena slowly placed her napkin on the table. "Alla Vassilievna," she began, her voice, against all expectations, steady. "Perhaps we could discuss my salary and my wardrobe another time. Today is your husband's celebration." Her mother-in-law narrowed her eyes, clearly not expecting defiance. "Are you being rude to me? Am I not your mother?" "I wish you well, and you're talking back." "You are not my mother," Elena interrupted. The statement was so unexpected that even the musicians faltered for a moment. "My mother passed away when I was 12. You are my husband's mother, and I respect you as long as you do not insult me." The air in the hall grew thick. Igor Mikhailovich choked and coughed. Denis finally lifted his head, his gaze as if he were seeing his wife for the first time. "Elena, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed through his teeth. "I'm defending myself," she replied, turning to her husband. "Your mother has been insulting me for 3 hours and you're silent." "Mom doesn't mean any harm. It's habit, like a memorized lesson," Denis stammered. "You're just misunderstanding." "I understand perfectly." Elena stood up, her chair scraping loudly as it moved back. I understand that in 7 years of marriage, you've never once stood up for me." Alla Vasilievna rose as well, her face turning crimson. "Who do you think you are, telling me what to do? I built this family. I raised Dennis, educated him, helped him get ahead, and you, a hanger-on, dare to contradict me." "I am your daughter-in-law," Elena stated quietly but clearly. "I'm tired of being your punching bag." She turned and walked towards the exit, feeling dozens of eyes on her back. Behind her, a chair crashed. Dennis had jumped up so suddenly that he'd knocked it over. He caught up to her in the empty foyer, grabbed her elbow, and spun her around to face him. "Have you lost your mind?" he hissed, flecks of spittle flying. "Do you realize what you've done? You shamed my mother in front of everyone." "I shamed her?" Elena yanked her arm free, clutching the reddened spot. "But it's okay for her to shame me. Mom is Mom. She's 67. You're young and smart. You could have kept quiet." "I've been keeping quiet for 7 years, Dennis." He looked at her with such a mixture of anger and confusion that Elena suddenly understood with absolute clarity. He would never change. "You know what?" he exhaled, and his voice took on that cold, detached tone she recognized from his mother. "Get out of here." "What did you say?" "Go cool off. We'll talk tomorrow." "Dennis, it's -1 degree outside." "I'm in a dress, no coat." "That's your problem." He was already opening the heavy oak door, and the frigid air hit Elena's face. "You made your bed, now lie in it." He pushed her towards the exit, practically shoving her over the threshold. The door slammed shut with a resounding thud. Elena stood on the high steps of the restaurant, hugging herself and gazing at the snow-dusted stairs. It was late evening, and no one was around. Her palms instantly went numb, and her legs in thin tights began to lose feeling. She took a step down, then another, trying not to think about what had just happened. She circled the building and sat down on a bench near the service entrance. The metal burned with cold even through her dress. Elena drew her knees up, trying to tuck them under her hem, and stared into the darkness. Snowflakes fell in large, unhurried flakes, landing on her eyelashes and melting on her cheeks. She wasn't crying. The tears had dried up about 3 years ago after another New Year's feast, where Alla Vasilievna had publicly called her barren and advised Dennis to find a normal woman. She had cried all night then, but now she sat watching the snow, feeling the cold seep into her bones and reach her very heart. Half an hour passed, perhaps an hour. Her fingers were numb and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Muffled sounds of music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses drifted from the restaurant. No one was looking for her. Dennis hadn't come out. Her mother-in-law, even less likely. Elena thought this must be what absolute loneliness felt like. Not when you're alone in an empty apartment, but when there are dozens of people around and not one of them considers it necessary to throw a coat over you. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. She had to lean on the back of the bench, waiting for the searing pain to subside. Her phone in her purse beeped. The battery had died. Elena looked at the dark screen, then at the empty road. No taxis, no pedestrians, just snow and the light from distant street lamps. She took a few steps towards the bus stop, but realized she wouldn't make it. She had no money for a taxi. Her card was at home, and it was a 40-minute bus ride to their Khrushchevka on the outskirts, if it was even still running. The woman sat back down, pressed her back against the cold wooden plank, and closed her eyes. She wondered if they would find her in the morning, or if she would turn into an icicle that the janitor would sweep off the bench with the snow. The thought seemed almost amusing. Elena offered a weak smile to her own bitter humor. Headlights suddenly flashed in her eyes. She squeezed them shut and raised her hand to shield herself. Through her fingers, she saw a huge black SUV slowly braking right in front of the bench. The engine ran quietly, almost silently. The window rolled down, and the scent of warmth and expensive perfume with notes of wood and tobacco wafted from the cabin. "Elena, is that you?" The voice was deep, concerned. She peered at the driver's face. High cheekbones, a confident set of shoulders, light eyes that seemed almost transparent in the darkness. She had seen this man somewhere before. "Kirill, what are you doing here?" Her voice sounded hoarse, almost unrecognizable. 3 years ago, he had been the chief auditor at their company. Then he moved to a large holding, and legends circulated about him. They said Kirill had turned around a loss-making plant in a month, that he owned a mansion in Rubliovka and a private jet, but Elena had never paid much attention. "Get in the car!" He opened the door, and the warm air enveloped her face, making her skin sting unpleasantly. "You're freezing." She didn't move. She simply couldn't. Too much had happened. "I can't. I don't have any money." The childish plea escaped her. Kirill looked at her with that firm confidence that required no further words. "You have me. That's more important." Elena felt a traitorous sting in her nose. She bit her lip to keep from crying and finally stood up, stepping into the warmth of the cabin. The leather seat welcomed her, soft and heated. The door closed, shutting out the snow, the cold, and the bench where she had mentally said goodbye to life. Kirill didn't rush to start the engine. He turned to her and offered a thermal mug from which steam was rising. "Here's some tea with ginger and lemon. Drink it." She obediently took it, wrapping her fingers around the hot plastic, feeling sensation return to them. The first sip burned her throat and spread warmth inside. "How did you know?" she asked, not looking up. "That I'm here?" "I was at the restaurant," Kirill replied simply. "I saw everything. I wish I had come out sooner. I thought you had left." Elena slowly raised her head. She didn't remember him among the guests, but that meant nothing. She remembered very few people, besides her mother-in-law and Dennis. "You were at Igor Mikhailovich's birthday. For business. We're planning a joint project with him." He said it without much enthusiasm, more stating a fact. But plans, sometimes change. She looked at him, trying to understand what lay behind his words. Kirill met her gaze and didn't look away. "Let's go, quickly," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Today, we're going to turn your life upside down." She remained silent, clutching the mug. "And we'll get revenge on them so they'll never forget," he added quietly. There was no malice in this promise, only the cold, calculated confidence of a man accustomed to winning. Elena swallowed. The tea cooled in her hands, but something long forgotten ignited within her. Not hope, even. She had forgotten how to hope. Something else, perhaps anger or a thrill. "What's your qualification, Elena?" Kirill suddenly asked, starting the engine. "Accounting, economic activity analysis, tax planning, higher education, a red diploma," she answered automatically, as if at an interview. "I know. I looked at your personal file 3 years ago when we were looking for a specialist for the department. You were the best. Why didn't you get the job?" Elena looked away. Alla Vasilievna called the HR manager, said I was married, planning children, would be constantly on sick leave. "And were you planning children then?" "Yes, back then." Kirill nodded, accepting this information without unnecessary emotion. "And now?" "Now I'm not planning anything," Elena replied honestly. "I just want to survive." "That's not enough." He shifted gears and the car moved off smoothly. "You deserve more. I'm offering you a position." "What position?" "Financial director." Elena choked on her tea. "Are you out of your mind? I have no management experience. At best, I'm a senior accountant. Those are different leagues." "Experience will come. You have a head and character. I saw today how you stood up and went against them. That's enough. I'll teach you the rest." She remained silent, processing what she had heard. Night streets, occasional cars, and traffic lights flashed by outside the window. It was warm and quiet inside the cabin. "Why do you want this?" she finally asked. "I'm nobody to you. We barely even talked." Kirill didn't answer immediately. He looked at the road, at the smooth ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. 3 years ago, he began quietly. "I came to your company for an audit. You were working late, preparing reports. You had the flu, you were sneezing into a handkerchief and taking pills, but you stayed until midnight. I asked why you weren't leaving, and you said that if you didn't finish, 5 employees who couldn't feed their children would be fired." Elena remembered that evening. Indeed, there had been an audit, and she had been dealing with endless reconciliations. "I thought then, now that's reliability," Kirill continued, "not in expensive suits and loud titles, but in people who don't abandon their own." She looked at his profile and was speechless. "I owe you," he grinned wryly. "You didn't know, but I heard about your mother-in-law's call and did nothing. I valued my position and career too much." "It's not your fault," she breathed. "It was my choice." He turned his head and looked her directly in the eyes. "Today, I will fix everything." The car stopped at a skyscraper in the center, its windows lit up on almost every floor despite the late hour. Kirill turned off the engine and faced Elena. "I have all the information about Igor Mikhailovich's business. Documents, contracts, schemes for tax evasion. For 7 years, he built an empire on not paying people and defrauding the state. Your mother-in-law is the nominal founder of half of his shell companies." Elena looked at him, feeling a cold wave rise within her. "You want to destroy them?" "I want justice," he corrected. "They humiliated you, threw you out onto the street, and for 7 years pretended you were nobody." He took a thin silver folder from the glove compartment and placed it on her lap. "Here's everything you need to start. Tomorrow morning, we go to my lawyer. The day after tomorrow, you start work. Monday, you have a meeting with the tax authorities." Elena opened the folder and with trembling fingers turned over the first page. Numbers, names, dates. For 7 years, while she cooked borscht and endured mockery, Igor Mikhailovich had siphoned millions through dummy accounts, and Alla Vassilievna had covered for him with her impeccable reputation as a socialite. "Why are you giving this to me?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll lose the contract." "I'll find other partners." Kirill spoke as if he were talking about replacing a supplier of office supplies. "And you'll find yourself." She closed the folder, pressing it to her chest like the most precious thing she had ever owned. And for the first time in many years, something alive flickered in her eyes. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "You can?" He had no doubt for a second. "You're stronger than you think." Outside the windows, the sky began to turn lilac. Dawn was approaching. Elena looked at the folder, at her hands, at a reflection in the dark glass. "Kirill, I agree," she said quietly. He nodded, started the engine, and the car smoothly merged back into the flow of the night city. They drove forward into a new day, which began with a clean slate. Snow continued to fall outside the window, covering old tracks and erasing the old life. Elena sat up straight, holding the folder on her lap and looking at the road. In her chest, where there had recently been only desolate emptiness, something warm was stirring. Not hope even, but certainty. She would return, and then they would learn who this little gray mouse in a cheap dress truly was. They ascended to the 47th floor in complete silence. Kirill stood beside her, not even looking in her direction, and this detachment, for some reason, didn't offend her, but soothed her. The doors opened, and Elena stepped into a spacious hall with panoramic windows. The night city spread out below, a million lights, and the sight took her breath away. She had never seen Moscow from such a height. "Come inside." Kirill took off his coat and tossed it onto a chair near the entrance. "Will you have coffee?" "Yes, I will." She walked further in, stopping in the middle of the vast living room, unsure where to put herself. Everything here was expensive but not ostentatious. No gaudy gold and crystal chandeliers like Alla Vassilievna's. Calm gray tones, clean geometry, and functionality. The home of a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Kirill returned with 2 cups, placing one in front of her on the glass table. Elena sat on the edge of the sofa and cupped the mug in her hands. The coffee smelled of bitter chocolate and something spicy. Real ground coffee, brewed in a machine. "Your husband called me 5 minutes ago," Kirill announced calmly, settling into the armchair opposite. Elena flinched, spilling some coffee. "What did he want?" "To find out if I'd seen you. Said you made a scene, left in an unknown direction, and he's worried." She gave a bitter chuckle. "Worried 3 hours after he threw me out into the cold." "I told him you're with me." Kirill took a sip, watching her reaction. "Completely fine." Elena froze. "Why did you do that?" "So he'd understand you're not alone, that there's someone willing to stand up for you." "What did he say?" "He was silent at first, then asked how much he'd have to pay you to come back and apologize to his mother." Something inside her snapped. She had been waiting for this conversation for 7 years, fearing it, avoiding it, hoping never to hear those words. "And what did you say?" she asked, looking into her cup. "That he doesn't have that kind of money." Elena raised her eyes to Kirill. He sat relaxed, leaning back in his chair, but there was no hint of fatigue in his posture. "He'll come here," she said. "Excellent, that's what I'm counting on." "You want him to see me here, in your house?" "I want him to see you." Elena finished her coffee and placed the cup on the table. Her hands stopped trembling. Instead of the familiar, ingrained pain, there was now a void that needed filling. "Tell me about Igor Mikhailovich's business," she said firmly, with figures, dates, and schemes. "I need to know it by tomorrow morning." Kirill looked at her with a long, attentive gaze. "Are you sure? You had a very difficult evening." "The easiest evening in the last 7 years," she interrupted, "because it's the last one like this." "Tell me." He stood up, walked to the massive oak table by the window, took a laptop, and returned to the sofa with it. Elena moved over, and now they sat side by side, separated only by the thin screen. "Look," Kirill opened a file. "Here's the parent company, Megastroy Construction Holding. Igor Mikhailovich is listed as Deputy for Development. Officially earns $200,000 a month. And unofficially? Unofficially, he owns a network of 12 companies through dummy individuals. Here's the list." Elena squinted at the screen, and everything swam before her eyes. Her brain, which for years had processed only salary reports and tax declarations, grudgingly entered working mode. "This is a classic scheme," she breathed. "Business fragmentation. Each company on the simplified tax system doesn't exceed the revenue limit. Taxes are minimal, and the real turnover goes into cash." For 3 years, they had worked without a single audit. They had skillfully hidden behind Igor Mikhailovich's reputation, his membership in public chambers, and his charitable donations. What donations? Elena suddenly remembered Alla Vassilievna boasting at the Jubilee that they had donated $1 million to a children's hospice. Smoke and mirrors. Kirill flipped the page. In reality, of those funds, only 1,200 reached the hospice. The rest settled in the accounts of a shell company registered to a distant relative of Alla Vassilievna. Elena leaned back against the sofa. It was impossible to comprehend. She had lived with these people for 7 years, eaten at the same table, given New Year's gifts. And not once, not even with a hint, had they revealed that their prosperity was built on such cynical deceit. "I have a question." She turned to Kirill. "You said you were planning a joint project with them. Why? You knew who they were." He paused, looking at the lights of the night city outside the window. "I knew, and I planned carefully, with documents, with guarantees." "I never work in the gray area, Elena. My reputation is worth more than any money." "Then why?" "To have leverage," he replied simply. "I was gathering information not to enter their business, but so that one day when the time came, I would have something to pressure them with." Elena looked at him, unable to believe such a thing was possible. "You didn't even know I would agree," she said. "I couldn't know that today would happen. I knew." He finally turned to her. Maybe not today, but I knew that one day you wouldn't stand for it, that they would cross a line from which there's no return. And what if I hadn't gone with you and stayed on that bench? I'll stay right here until you feel warm, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Then he offered, I could get you a drink. Her nose prickled. She stood abruptly and moved to the window, needing to shield her face. The city below thrummed with its own rhythm. Cars streamed past, neon signs pulsed, laughter spilled from restaurants, arguments erupted, lovers embraced. It was a typical night, but for Elena it marked a point of no return. You said we're going to a lawyer tomorrow. Yes, 10 o'clock in the morning. I have nothing to wear. Kirill rose and walked to the built-in wardrobe. He opened its doors, revealing a bathroom, a robe, and a towel. From a hanger, he retrieved a dark blue suit in a garment bag. This should fit. I bought it for my sister's graduation, but she changed her mind last minute and chose a different style. The fabric is expensive, and the size is roughly yours. Elena turned. The suit looked impeccable, sharp, elegant, clearly not from a mass market store. Do you keep women's suits on hand in case you're sheltering a cold guest? She tried to joke, but her voice faltered. I was just waiting for the right moment for it to be needed. She took the suit, holding it to her chest. The fabric was cool and smooth, carrying the scent of newness and an unfamiliar home. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. A stylist will be here in the morning. A stylist? For what? You need to get your hair and makeup done. This isn't about making you look pretty, he added, sensing her confusion. It's about helping you feel confident. She nodded, swallowing a lump in her throat. The bathroom was as large as Dennis's old bedroom. Elena stood under the hot spray for a long time, feeling her muscles thaw, the tension of 7 years drain away. She washed off the lingering scent of the restaurant, the cloying perfume of Alla Vasilyevna, the smoke that had permeated her dress, washing away an old life. When she emerged, an ivory silk robe lay on the bed. She hung the suit on a hanger, smoothed the lapels, and gazed at the perfectly tailored jacket. She would wear it tomorrow. In the living room, only a floor lamp was lit. Kirill sat in an armchair, a book in his lap, but he set it aside as Elena appeared. I've made up the bedroom, he said, gesturing to the door on the right. You can go to sleep. And you? I still have work to do. Elena remained by the doorway, slender, pale, her hair damp, looking at this stranger, this almost unknown man who in a few hours had done more for her than her husband had in 7 years. Kirill, listen, she called. He looked up. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for this. You already are, he smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. You've agreed to fight. That's the most valuable gift. She nodded, turned, and went into the bedroom, closing the door softly. Sleep eluded her. She lay on the vast bed, cocooned in a warm duvet, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed below. Somewhere else, in another life, remained Dennis, his mother, their cramped apartment with its saggy sofa. It hadn't even occurred to them to look for her. Dennis had called not to win her back, but to negotiate terms. At 4 a.m, she rose, pulled on the robe, and went into the living room. Kirill sat in the same posture before his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Can't sleep? He asked without turning. No. Could I review the documents again? He nodded, shifting to make space on the sofa. Elena sat beside him, and they both turned their attention to the screen. She asked questions. He answered. She absorbed numbers, charts, dates. It was a case of work saving her from madness. By 7 a.m, she had a complete picture. She knew everything about Igor Mikhailovich's business, where he made money, where he hid it, where he stole it. That's enough, she said, leaning back against the sofa. More than enough. At 8, the stylist arrived. A young man with glasses lacking lenses, immaculately manicured hands, and a booming voice. He clapped his hands upon seeing Elena, not in distaste, but with professional excitement. My word, what a canvas! Kirill Stanislavovich, she's a gem! Do you realize the million looks one can create with cheekbones like these? Do it. You have an hour, Kirill said curtly. The stylist snapped his fingers, and 15 minutes later, Elena sat before a large mirror. Her hair was straightened and styled into soft waves, its color refreshed. The makeup was subtle, yet it transformed her face, making it sharper, brighter, younger. When she put on the suit, a stranger looked back from the mirror. An elegant, polished, confident woman who couldn't be cast out into the cold, who couldn't be treated as insignificant. In the car, Elena was silent, gazing out the window. The city was waking up. People hurried to work, sipped coffee from paper cups, yawned on the subway. A typical morning. The lawyer's office was in a Stalin-era skyscraper on Kotelnikskaya embankment. The conference room boasted soaring ceilings, stucco molding, and heavy draperies. A distinguished man with weary eyes, Boris Lvovich, introduced himself. Kirill Stanislavovich has explained everything, he said, glancing briefly at Elena. The situation is complex but not hopeless. Forgery, a criminal case. We will have proof, Elena interrupted. Igor Mikhailovich corresponds extensively. He records everything. He's pathologically incapable of keeping secrets solely in his head. Boris Lvovich looked at her with a different expression, no longer condescending but appraising. Are you prepared to testify against your husband and his parents? Yes, I am, she stated firmly. Right now. The lawyer hummed and produced a blank form. She dictated the facts in a steady, calm voice. How Denis had once let slip that his mother helped him with a bank signature. How Alla Vassilievna bragged about her connections everywhere. How Igor Mikhailovich had repeatedly hinted that documents were mere paper and connections were what truly mattered. Boris Lvovich jotted notes, occasionally asking for clarification. Kirill sat by the window, observing. This is sufficient to begin, the lawyer concluded when she finished. Tomorrow I'll file the charges. Simultaneously, we'll initiate proceedings to contest the apartment sale. They have other real estate. Elena opened a folder. The house in the suburbs is registered to Alla Vassilievna, but it was purchased with funds siphoned from the firm. I found the payment slips. Boris Lvovich took the documents, scanned them, and whistled. Where did you get these? Kirill Stanislavovich provided them. She hadn't even noticed how easily she'd said his name. This changes everything. The lawyer looked at Kirill with respect, significantly. They exited the office 2 hours later. Elena felt a strange lightness. In the car, Elena retrieved the phone Kirill had given her that morning. I need to go home, she said, to get my things and some documents. I'll drive you. No, I'll go alone. Kirill looked at her and nodded. I'll wait in the car near the entrance. Call if you need anything. She entered the building and climbed to the 4th floor. The key turned in the lock. The door opened. Denis sat at the kitchen table in his underwear, drinking beer in front of the television. He saw her and froze with a can halfway to his mouth. I'm here for my belongings, Elena said, walking into the bedroom. Don't be distracted. She took a suitcase from the overhead compartment and began packing documents, her laptop a photograph of her parents. Denis stormed into the room. What do you think you're doing? Where did you spend the night? With that scoundrel. She didn't reply, continuing to pack. I'm talking to you. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around to face him. You're my wife. How dare you disgrace me in front of my mother, in front of everyone? Elena looked at his hand, then into his eyes. Take your hand off me, she said quietly. As if. Take your hand off me. She paused. And remember this, Denis. This morning, I filed a police report against your mother for document forgery. Tomorrow, your father will receive a summons from the tax authorities. The day after tomorrow, you'll face problems that money and connections can't solve. He paled and released her shoulder. You're lying. You wouldn't dare? I already have. She closed the suitcase, clicking the latches shut. You threw me out into the streets 7 years ago, allowed your mother to humiliate me. You betrayed me every day by remaining silent when she insulted me, and now you will live with the consequences. All of you will." She walked past him, past the kitchen, past the entryway where she had kept shoes in perfect rows for 7 years. At the door, she turned. "I'll file for divorce tomorrow. I want nothing from you. I won't even keep your surname." She stepped out, and the door clicked shut behind her. Kirill waited in the car, the engine running. She tossed the suitcase onto the back seat and got into the passenger seat. He looked at her straight back, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed on the windshield. "Where to now?" Elena exhaled, a long, slow breath, like releasing air held for 7 years underwater. "I don't know yet. Probably a hotel." Imagine that. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the unknown. Kirill nodded and drove out of the courtyard. The city shimmered with evening lights. Dusk settled over the Moscow River. Elena watched the houses, bridges, cars, and people glide past. Millions of fates, millions of stories. Her story was just beginning. They pulled up to a small hotel. Kirill switched off the engine but didn't rush to get out. He gazed at the dark expanse of the river, at the reflection of the windows on the water. "Thank you," Elena said. He turned his head. "For what, specifically?" "For everything, especially for not leaving me on that bench." He nodded, accepting. "Why me?" she asked, her question devoid of coyness or uncertainty, only curiosity. "Of all the women you could have helped, why me?" Kirill was silent. Outside, the wind rippled the water, breaking the golden reflections. "Because you're the only one who didn't ask for it." Elena closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, in the most sealed corner of her soul, something thawed. Not love, not yet. Something else. "I want to work," she said, "as a financial director." "No, as your partner." She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Kirill wasn't surprised, nor did he laugh. He simply looked at her with a long, appraising gaze. "That's a different league, Elena. They play hard, and not always by the rules." "I've spent 7 years training with champions," she replied. Kirill extended his hand. She took it, feeling a firm, dry warmth. "Tomorrow at 8. Don't be late." "I won't be." Ultimately, Igor Mikhailovich was not imprisoned. His lawyers barely managed to extricate Elena's former father-in-law. He remained free, but without his business or his former reputation. Alla Vassilievna received 2 years of probation. She had forged the signature, but the investigation couldn't gather proof of direct intent. She still writes complaints to every authority, demanding justice. Dennis, meanwhile, has succumbed to alcoholism. Last month, Elena happened to see him at a bus stop, unshaven, wearing a borrowed jacket, holding a paper cup of coffee. He looked right through her, not recognizing his ex-wife. One evening, after another day of work, Kirill and Elena exited the car. The elevator carried them once again to the 47th floor, their reflections appearing in the mirrored walls. A tall man in an expensive coat and a woman in a blue suit, her back straight, her gaze clear. Elena looked at her reflection and smiled. She had finally become who she was meant to be.